November 6th, in addition to the candidates for office, Florida voters will have 11 amendments to the Constitution to consider. Three of the amendments have garnered some controversy: 5, 6, and 8. Let's discuss these amendments with Erin Jensen, field organizer for Vote No on 8.
This is the next episode, ladies and gentlemen, of Interesting with Rodrick Colbert. And today we have an interesting discussion we're going to have about the amendments to the Florida Constitution. And we have a very knowledgeable person who will be talking about Amendment 8, but also be touching briefly on the other amendments. So I'd like to introduce Erin Jensen, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh yeah, well it's actually Erin. My name's Erin Jensen, and I'm the field coordinator for the Vote No committee. So essentially the ACLU established the committee. They looked at all the amendments that were going to be on the ballot in November, and they decided that they are going to oppose 3 of them specifically because obviously, as I'm sure you guys know, the ACLU, they protect constitutional rights, and they figured that these 3 amendments, if they were to be passed, they would infringe, people's constitutional rights and, people's civil rights. So it was these 3 specifically. They established the committee, and then since they established it, a lot of other organizations have joined on in opposition to the amendments as well. So I'm the field coordinator for the campaign. I'm based in the Tampa office. So.
Okay. Now, I do know that I've been reading about some of the amendments. I know the League of Women Voters oppose it on principle in terms of they feel that this is a wrong way of amending the Constitution. I don't know if you can just briefly talk about that, and then we'll go into the ACLU's position.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you're right. The League of Women Voters did take a position on no on all of the amendments. And just to be clear, there are 11 total that are going to be on the ballot in November. It's number 1 through 12, so it's a little confusing. There's no number 7. It was dropped from the ballot. Okay. And just as a little bit of background, all of these amendments were legislatively referred. So our state legislator put these amendments on the ballot as opposed to the people of Florida putting them on. So the people of Florida, they can put an amendment on the ballot through state petition. Now that's not how any of these amendments are on the ballot. They're coming from the legislature either through this past session or the year before. So the League of Women Voters, they took a look at them and decided that they're voting no on all of them. And you're right, a lot of the reason that they're saying no is because they don't believe a lot of these things belong in the Constitution. Some of these issues, a few of the amendments are about, certain tax issues or tax breaks. And while, they may or may not agree with taxing or giving tax breaks to those individual groups, they don't think that that should be in the Constitution. That should be, public policy laws. It shouldn't be an amendment to our Constitution because once you put something in our Constitution, it's pretty hard to get it out. So it's pretty much there permanently, and that's not necessarily the place to, be making tax law.
Okay. And when an amendment is put into the Constitution by the legislature, is it by a simple majority of both houses and then the governor signs off on it, or is there like a higher threshold?
No, there's not a higher threshold. From what I understand, and everyone should double check me, but I believe that it just requires 60% of both houses to approve to put it on the ballot. So someone proposes the language, and then both houses have to approve it by 60% to get it on the ballot. Yeah.
And then the governor signs off on it too?
I don't believe the governor has to sign off on it being... Now, this is just for it to go on the ballot for people to vote on.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and a lot of these amendments have come from legislation that, someone might have proposed in the House or in the Senate that didn't necessarily get too far. So maybe they change the language a little bit, and then they say, okay, we're just going to put it on the ballot in November for people to vote on. Now, any amendment on the ballot requires 60% to pass. So 60% of the people voting specifically on the amendment have to vote yes for it to actually pass. So it does require more than just a simple majority of the Florida voters voting for it.
So in essence, a legislator could try to get something passed if they feel that legislation won't pass through the normal legislation, through both houses and then the governor signing off of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if they feel their legislation might not have a chance of getting through, they can try to get it on the ballot. I mean, I mean, 60% voting yes is a hurdle, especially on an amendment. Unfortunately, there's a lot of drop off on people, not voting down ballot. But I guess if they feel their legislation isn't going to go through, or maybe they tried it and it didn't work, they can, modify it and try to get it on the ballot. So.
Or it could be just an ego thing too. These are politicians we're dealing with.
Possibly, I don't know.
Okay, so let's just talk briefly about the amendments the ACLU is concentrating on, and then we'll talk in depth about 8.
Okay, definitely. So like I mentioned, the ACLU is opposing 3 specific amendments. That's 3 out of the 11. And those are amendments 5, 6, and 8. And like I said, they decided on these because if they are to be passed, they violate people's civil rights and civil liberties, or they, change the Constitution, which obviously that's what the ACLU is all about. So the first one is Amendment 5, and this is actually one of the most complicated ones. If for anyone who's already gotten their ballot, maybe in the mail, you'll see the actual wording. It's very lengthy. It's like this long. It's crazy. And the language is really, the language on all of them is very complicated because, like I said, it's written by people in the legislature. It can be intentionally misleading. There's a lot of, there can be a lot of like double negatives and just a lot of like legalese that, lay people might not necessarily understand. I mean, I certainly didn't understand it when I read through the entire language. So essentially, Amendment 5 is about the state courts. If it were to be passed, it would drastically shift the balance of power in our state government. Obviously, everyone knows we have 3 branches, of government, and they're all balanced out equally, checks and balances. If this amendment were to be passed, it would take power away from the state Supreme Court and give it to the state legislature. The legislature would have more power in changing the rules of the court. Now, this isn't court rulings or court decisions. They can't change that. But it's procedures of how the court operates. So they would be able to more readily change that. They would also be able to give approval to justices nominated by the governor to the state Supreme Court. And a lot of what this is politicizing the state court. If you're giving power to the legislature obviously itself is politicized. Our state court system is not. So it's giving the legislator the power to politicize, our state Supreme Court. And obviously the ACLU, felt that would be a major problem if this were to be passed. So that's why they decided to oppose it. And that's Amendment 5.
Wow.
Yeah. Now the second one they're opposing is Amendment 6, and this, people might have heard a lot about this because Planned Parenthood is a big organization opposing it. There's a big No on 6 campaign. Amendment 6 is about abortion rights. Basically, if it were to be passed, it basically makes decisions that should be made by a woman in private in consultation with her doctor. It totally politicizes those decisions. And it's ironic because a lot of these politicians, they talk all about like small government or keeping government out of healthcare, but they would like this amendment to be passed, which is incredibly intrusive. And there's an element of the amendment that deals with the privacy clause in our Constitution. And obviously the ACLU believes in like protecting, citizens' right to privacy, and especially in the cases, of an abortion, of a woman's choice whether or not she wants to have an abortion. So this amendment would take away those choices for women in the state of Florida if it were to be passed. And the third one is Amendment 8, which we have decided to really focus on a lot. This is probably the most misleading amendment on the ballot, if only because the title is religious freedom. So anyone who's scanning down their ballot and says, oh, Amendment 8, religious freedom, why would I be against religious freedom? Sounds great.
Yeah, most people wouldn't be opposed to religious freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
Generally.
Yeah, but the amendment itself, it's not about religious freedom, it's about religious funding. So if this amendment were to be passed, essentially any religious organization or entity can apply for and receive state funding from the government. With no accountability or oversight whatsoever. The amendment language doesn't stipulate anything about who is going to be deciding who gets the money and if there's going to be any oversight or any accountability. So let's say this amendment passes and I decide, oh, I'm the Church of Erin now. I would like some money from the state government. I can do whatever I want with that money. A lot of people who are in favor of this they talk a lot about school vouchers, and that's definitely a distinct possibility of like what could happen with this money. Any religious affiliation or any any religious school could go and apply for and receive state money from the government. But it's not just about vouchers. I mean, there's, for an example, let's say that like a Catholic adoption agency, they want to receive money from the state under this new amendment if it were to be passed. Since this amendment doesn't stipulate anything about accountability or oversight, let's say they get the money from the state and then this Catholic adoption agency, they decide to engage in discriminatory practices. Oh, gay couples, we don't want you to be allowed to adopt children. And there's nothing, there's nothing in this amendment that would prevent something like that from happening. Right now we already have rules in place about, religious charities and such, they get tax breaks, etc. But they're not allowed to use any of that money to forward their own, religious principles and ideals. Their charities or whatever, they have to be, free of their own, ideals. If this amendment were to be passed, that basically goes out the window. They can do whatever they want with the money from the state government. And like I said, there's no accountability or no oversight. It just opens the doors wide open for fraud. And it's definitely, like I said in the beginning, it's not at all about religious freedom. It is about religious funding, and we definitely want people to be clear on exactly what the amendment would do.
Now, the persons who are trying to push the Amendment 8, we will assume that they feel that what's currently the situation that a parochial school, for instance, could not receive a voucher from the state of Florida to have students come from a public school to go to a parochial school. Is that currently the case? That if you couldn't get, parents could not get funding to go to a parochial school and apply for the funding from a public school?
Yes, that's currently the case. And like I said, if this amendment passed, that could easily change, very quickly. So.
Well, I would just imagine, as someone that worked in the public school system, that if you want to send your child to a private or parochial school, then you should pay for it. You shouldn't expect the taxpayers to pay for it.
Exactly.
I don't think that's stopping anyone from going to the parochial school.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's stopping any individual parent from deciding where they want to, if they want to send their child to a parochial school. And you bring up a good point. I mean, this amendment could easily take away tax dollars or state funding that should be going to public schools. Those schools are funded by the state, by the government. That money shouldn't be funding any parochial schools, any private religious schools. This amendment, if it were to be passed, could easily take away, a lot of money from our state public schools.
Yeah. And I think essentially the problem with that is that public schools are open to anyone, whereas private parochial schools can determine who they want to admit. So exactly. I think that's that's something people need to take note of. I know there's a big controversy on they think public schools are failing, and private and parochial schools are better. But the reality is that public schools will take kids.
Yes.
Any parent is allowed to bring their child to that school. Parochial and private schools can determine that if you're not their religion or you don't like their brand of religion, they can actually deny your child enrolling in their school.
Yes.
So I think it would be unconstitutional for a private or parochial school to take funding if they don't allow anyone to enroll in their school.
Yes, exactly, and that goes back to what I mentioned earlier. It seems this amendment would allow any of these organizations, schools and otherwise, to receive state money and then turn around and engage in possibly discriminatory practices. So we definitely believe that, that should not be in our state constitution. That should not be allowed whatsoever. So.
And also, just note, private and parochial schools can discriminate in who they employ as well.
Yes.
They can pick or choose, if their staff member is a Catholic or not, because they currently don't accept public funding. Now, I don't know if this is out of the scope of what you know, but often I've noticed that in the ACLU, here in the state of Florida, some of these legislatures are actually taking note of what's happening around in other states and are trying to bring that into Florida. And often they fail when they don't take note of the failure in other states. They just try to bring it to Florida. Have you noticed if any of these other type of amendments or Amendment 8 have been tried in other states and have not failed or may have succeeded? I'm not sure if you know that or not.
Yeah. Well, on the three specific ones that we oppose, off the top of my head, I can't really think of an example where that was passed in another state. But I know, just thinking about it, there's at least one amendment that's going to be on the ballot in November. And now the number is slipping me. It's either three or four, but it's the Tabor Amendment. And it actually was passed in Colorado. And the amendment's really complicated, and it's all about like taxes and stuff. But from what I understand, when it was passed in Colorado, which I think was over, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, the funding that the state had to fund, schools and roads and all this stuff was so drastically reduced that they eventually had to wind up, overturning the amendment. So a very similar thing is on the ballot in Florida, this election cycle. So I know for sure that one has been tried. Like I said, specifically on 5, 6, and 8. I can't think of the top of my head, something exactly like this. Obviously with 6 about, women's rights and women's health issues, you've seen amendments try to be passed like that all over states, all across the country, and on federal
many
level.
times.
Yeah, many, many times in the past few years. So, there's things that are, similar to it. Absolutely. So.
I think sometimes the legislatures don't even really think they're going to really pass. I think they just do it just to score political points with their base.
Possibly.
I don't know how many times they've tried to limit a woman's right to reproductive rights, knowing that they're going to be eventually declared unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So other than just telling your friends and family to vote no on these amendments, what else would a concerned person do?
Well, yes, definitely spread the word about voting no. And I would suggest because a lot of people, you tell them, oh, just vote no. Well, I mean, they want the information, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to just blindly be told, just vote no on everything without the information.
Yeah,
so I'd suggest, you can check out our Facebook page, which is Vote No on 8, and also just the League of Women Voters. They have they did come out in opposition to all the amendments, but they also have a breakdown of, Amendment 1, this is what it would do if it were to be passed. This is what would happen if it were voted down. So they have a really simple breakdown on their website, the League of Women Voters of Florida. Definitely being educated on what exactly it would do, so you don't just give people a passing, oh, vote no on everything, because like I said, people want background information. And then just encouraging people to vote down the ballot. I mean, the amendments are the last thing on the ballot, I believe. So people have to get through all the other races, and just to, just don't forget about the stuff that's at the bottom, because it's definitely still very important. And I would really encourage people, if it's possible for them, to vote by mail, because the amendment is so long, or not the amendment, because the ballot is so long.
Yeah, the ballot is long.
Yeah. For people to be going into the voting booth on election day, and there's going to be plenty of people who haven't seen it before. They haven't seen a sample. They haven't seen the language of the amendments. I mean, it'll take just a significant amount of time just to read through it once, and that's reading through it once, like I said, you're probably not going to understand it. Like, that would be really weird if you just got it after you just read through it once. So it's just going to be very time consuming. So I definitely encourage people either to vote by mail or vote early, or just do their research beforehand so they know, okay, this is what I'm going to vote on it. I already know, all this stuff. So you can just go in there and write it all down. So you're not in the booth for a really long amount of time, especially on election day. We figure there's going to be lines and everything. So. Yeah.
And also, people should know that Wednesday, October 31st, is the deadline to request your ballot.
Yes.
Your vote-in ballot. And I also found out through a friend of mine that works for the supervised election office that you can actually go physically now to the supervised election office to vote. You have to take your current ID with your current address, and you can actually vote now at any of the 4 supervised election offices here in Hillsborough County. Not sure about the other counties, but I know that's true in Hillsborough County. Yeah. Okay, well, any other information you'd like to share?
No, I think that I pretty much got it. Like I said, the ACLU, we're opposing amendments 5, 6, and 8, and we definitely want especially people to pay attention to 8 and don't be thrown off by the title. It's not about religious freedom, it's about religious funding, and just encourage people to, vote all the way down the ballot and just remember about, about the amendments and the other stuff that might be at the bottom. So.
Okay. And would you like to give the website again? I will put it on there.
Yeah, definitely. We do have a website for Amendment 8. It's just vote no on 8. It's the number 8.com. So, and there's additional information there, a lot of links to like other articles that have appeared in papers throughout the state, editorials in opposition to Amendment 8. We also have some materials on there as well, like downloadable PDFs. So definitely check it out. There's a lot more information on there.
Okay, and then I will also put up the information on the local supervised elections offices, so you can get information, as well as the League of Women Voters.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, then we'd like to appreciate you taking the time to be on my program, Interesting with Rodrick Colbert. And we hope you have a good day.
All right, well, thanks for having me, Rodrick.
Okay.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Erin.
All right.